All right. Good evening, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
Of course. We know that Veterans Day to 2020 is coming up. It's next week, Wednesday. First, let me just thank you for your service. I
Well,
am
I'm
in,
sure, as you know, it was an honor to serve. So I
yes,
appreciate that, though.
of course. I'm gonna say it on camera here. I'm enjoying your backdrop. It's very motivating. We are celebrating and honoring America's veterans for their patriotism, love of country, and willingness to serve and sacrifice for the good. But however, we have veterans who've come back home, families, friends, faith groups, loved ones have had some difficulties in being able to support them in the best way possible. A lot of times, based on depending on what your deployment was or where you were, sometimes you don't feel that you can share all that information. And rather than just kind of going halfway, sometimes I think veterans just don't share much at all. And it causes that disconnection to continue and makes it difficult for loved ones to wrap their arms around them. Today, what we're doing is speaking with veterans such as yourself. In as much as I want to thank you for your service and all the veterans that are out there, this conversation is as much bringing awareness to some of the struggles and the issues that veterans may have experienced, giving civilians an insight, if you will, into some of what might have gone on or how they might support them. So we're going to head on down the road with this conversation. Again, thank you so much for coming. I'd like for you to introduce yourself, your name, branch of service, service period, and whatever you feel comfortable in saying.
Sure. Thanks very much.
You're
So I'm
welcome.
Scott VanCleef. Um, I entered the Air Force in 1972 and retired about 29 and a half years later, right at the beginning of January of 2002. I had a great career. I retired as a brigadier general. I did what I wanted to do when I entered the Air Force, which was to be a fighter pilot, following my dad's footsteps. He was a World War II veteran, a P-47 fighter pilot himself, and he stayed in for 28 and a half years himself. So that's how I got to where I am.
Wow, that's wonderful. Now, with that job, sometimes it's difficult for someone to understand what is that job like as a fighter pilot. Do you just get up every day and go flying? Help
Well,
us
not
on.
exactly, but there's a path everybody has to take. In order to be a pilot in the Air Force, you first of all have to be a college graduate, and you have to have some kind of a commissioning source. In my case, it was ROTC from Purdue University. And from there, then you go to undergraduate pilot training. That's about a year-long process. And based on your ranking, as you get through pilot training, you get to select the weapon systems that you want to go into, whether it be fighters, tankers, transport, bombers, those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And I was fortunate enough to be able to select a fighter. And then after that, once you get into a fighter, it takes about another year before you're mission qualified to go out and really do the job. But day to day in a fighter squadron, you would fly 3 to 4 times a week, good week. There's lots of additional duties and other training that you do between flights, but a flight itself would take, you start briefing 2 hours before you fly. You fly for an hour to an hour and a half. You come back and you debrief for another hour and a half. So it's a full day to go out and fly a mission. And you fly a mission depends on whatever type of airplane you're in and what the primary role of that fighter is, and you go out and practice those kinds of things so that you are ready to go to combat if you're called upon. So kind of a typical day.
Yeah. That's a lot of training, a lot of intensity, a
It
lot of
is
discipline.
great fun.
Yeah. So, what would you say that kind of made you be interested? You mentioned your dad. Was
Yeah.
there anything else that endeared you to flying?
I would lay it mostly at his feet, but I can remember from a very young age wanting to be a pilot in particular and a fighter pilot specifically. So from the time, probably as far back as I can remember, that was my goal. So everything I did as I was growing up, going through college, uh, prepared me to be able to get accepted into the Air Force as a pilot.
That is very interesting. Our oldest son went to the Air Force Academy. And of
It's,
course,
yeah,
after his initial training, then they get to make some decisions about where they want to go. And
exactly.
of
Yeah.
course, flying is an option at that point, but he was not inclined to do that. He had the stature for it, but he wasn't inclined to do that. So I know a lot of people find that very fascinating. You would think that the fear factor into play. How did you deal with that? Was there any?
No, not really. There was an excitement factor, is what there was,
Okay.
and there was a joy factor. Flying is great fun to me. It's not for everyone, but to me, flying in particular was great fun. And if
Hmm.
you really want to fly to the extreme, flying fighters is the way to go. It's always challenging. Every mission is different. Every day is different. So you never get bored with it ever.
So I hear my husband is a pilot, and he says pilots walk around with their eyes towards the sky, I believe is the phrase. And in my Air Force career, we had to go to SOS, Squadron Officer School. And
Sure.
part of that training involved planning a war, which meant that in that room we had fighter pilots, heavies, or the larger
Right.
aircrafts, we had weather guys, and we have intel and all those things. So I got a sense from the fighter pilots that they like living life with a certain degree of excitement. So I think I'm understanding a little bit about what you're saying.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
over, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're exactly right. Yeah.
Over your Air Force career, though, this career path must have taken you through a lot of different, we call it campaigns or challenges. How did you experience that? What was that like for you?
Well, from the time I was in the Air Force, primarily 72 to 2002, I was particularly for the first 20 years, which is the time that you're actively flying primarily. Um, I was a Cold War airman. Uh, the big threat was the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc nations, and there was not a lot of shooting going on. It was a Cold War. You had to be ready to go all the time, but there was very little actual hot combat.
Hmm.
Now, in 1991, with Desert Storm, everything changed, and the Air Force, in particular, has been engaged in combat operations continuously
Hmm.
since 1991. So the generation that has followed me had a very different kind of career path, and none of them have been in the Air Force during a period that we were not in actual combat operations somewhere around the world. So
Hmm.
two very different kinds of experiences. I had been in the Air Force for 26 and a half years before I ever flew my first real combat mission and got shot at. And I was a brigadier general at the time.
Hmm.
So during the time of Desert Storm, for example, I missed that as an active pilot because I was in the embassy in a staff position in Cairo, Egypt.
Hmm.
So, but anybody who's a veteran from the current time frame is going to have had a very different experience than what
Mhm.
I went through.
Yeah, my husband and I, shortly after we got married, as a matter of fact, while we were on our honeymoon, we got activated for Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And so we ended up going in separate directions. Although he was in the front end and I was in the back, I was a flight nurse. We
Yeah.
we ended up in different areas. He was based out of Germany, and I was in Spain, and we couldn't seem to get it together.
No,
But
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, it's been a very I consider it an exciting experience. How would you say there are a lot of missing milestones and events and family life and things that goes by while one is serving, especially when they've been in as long as you were? How did you deal with some missing those milestones? And can you remember a particular milestone that was more impactful to you?
Well, again, things were different back then, so that today's airmen will have numerous 6-month deployments where
Hmm.
they go out for 6 months and a year or two later go out again. That was not the case during the bulk of my career. So
Hmm.
the one time that I was absent from my family for the longest time was a 1 year remote tour, or what we call an unaccompanied tour.
Hmm.
Believe it or not, it was late 70s, and I went to Iran. That's back when Iran was still on our side. And I was a F-5 instructor pilot for the Iranian Imperial Air Force at the time. But 12 months with a 30-day break for midterm leave. So I was gone from my family for that period of time. And I had a very young daughter, my first daughter, at the time. So I missed everything during that year. I missed Christmas, missed Thanksgiving. I missed her kind of developing during that time frame. She would have been, let's see, in 78, she would have been 3. So I missed all of that. For the remainder of my career, most of my longest TDYs weren't more than about 30 days. And
Okay.
generally speaking, I don't recall having missed holidays for my family and those kinds of things. We managed to work around it with the various temporary duties, which were short enough that we could we could handle that. But that was a really long year
Yeah.
when I was gone from them. I remember that clearly. It was we had
Hmm.
no cell phones, we had no email. I could only call home on the phone commercially about once a month because it cost me $100 to call for
Wow.
about 20 minutes at the time, and that was big bucks for a lowly captain back in back in 1978, 77, 78.
Hmm.
So that was very different. The way we kept in touch, of course, was the mail, which
Hmm.
was slow. It would take 10 days to 2 weeks for a letter to get to me. And then my wife would send me cassette audio tapes sometimes.
Okay.
She would tell me her letter instead of sending it to me. So that's the way we kept in touch, but it was far different from the ability today to do a Zoom call back home.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, definitely. Very. I think I saw a commercial or something the other day where there was a millennial of sorts that was standing outside of a telephone booth asking, "What is that?" So
Exactly.
definitely
Yeah.
different times. And so during those times, especially that 1 year when you were gone, other than was there anything that kept you going, motivating you and sustaining you during that time? Those were critical years. That first 3-year-old, that a lot of things are going on during that time.
Yeah.
Ha-
Well, the key to that, you just can't be obsessed with what you're missing. You have to focus on what you're doing. And the good news for me, I was in a very small team in this uh, air base in southwest Iran. There are only 11 Air Force members on the team, and we coalesced as a team. We supported each other, and we
Mm-hmm.
focused on the mission. And it was pretty high tempo. I flew a
Hmm.
lot during that time, so you keep your um, keep your mind on the job and not obsessing with the fact that you're separated from your family.
Mm-hmm. A lot of compartmentalizing that's going on during those times.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been in the career and you enjoy your flying, and now you're approaching your end of your duty time, retirement. Now, a lot of people look forward to that. They're going to be home with their families and so forth. But nevertheless, it still comes with transition and impact and change. What are some of the things that you experienced during that time as you approach that time frame?
Yeah, well, I would have stayed in longer if I could have, quite frankly. But when you become a flag officer as a general officer, if you don't get selected for the next grade, you're expected to leave within the next year, whether you've hit your 30-year mark or not. So when I didn't make my promotion to 2 stars, I knew my time was limited, and I started planning for the transition at that point. Now, most of the folks in my job, which was foreign military sales and international affairs at the time, would have looked to transition into industry and become a international business development person with the major defense industries. That did not attract me at all, and going to the airlines did not attract me either. That I just never really wanted to do that kind of flying. So I was in the position. I was lucky. Both of my daughters were out of the house, married off my payroll, so I didn't have to support them. And my wife and I had a choice: go for the well-paying job in industry, or go for the good life. And we chose to go for the good life. And for me, what that entailed was to become a professional woodworker, building custom hardwood furniture. So immediately after retirement, my wife and I moved to Chicago for a year. I went through an apprenticeship program in a woodworking facility to learn how to be a professional. I'd been an amateur hobbyist woodworker for a long time, but making the transition to professional woodworker was a big step. So we went there, and during that first year, quite frankly, I made a very clean break from the Air Force. The guys I worked with hardly knew we had an Air Force, so it just wasn't an issue in my life during that year. But when we then ended up settling here in Southwest Virginia, I got involved with the local Air Force Association chapter. That reconnected me with my Air Force roots.
Okay.
And that's how I've managed to, in my own mind anyway, to continue to serve and give back to the Air Force that gave me so much. I got very involved with them. As a matter of fact, I got so involved that I ended up being chairman of the board of the National Association. So that was a big commitment.
Yeah, that's involved.
Since I've been over that hump, now I'm involved, as you well know, in Civil Air Patrol, and that's where the focus of my continuing service, I hope, to the Air Force and to our nation. So it's been an interesting transition, but we've never looked back. We love it here in Southwest Virginia, and wouldn't trade it for anything.
So many questions I want to ask you, but you mentioned Civil Air Patrol. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. I got involved with CAP primarily because of my outreach from the Air Force Association. Air Force Association and Civil Air Patrol have a mutual mission of aerospace education. And in order to further my local chapter's outreach, I reached out to the Civil Air Patrol, and the best way to get cooperation is to join them. So I joined them. I flew as a pilot with CAP for a couple of years, but then I discovered it was just too tough for me personally to stay proficient, and I was not comfortable with my ability to do that. I kind of stiff-armed going through all the Civil Air Patrol professional development things for a very long time. I was kind of content to be a retired general in the Civil Air Patrol. I was a senior member. I had no rank in Civil Air Patrol, but everybody called me general anyway, so it was not a big deal. But then a couple years ago, we had a vacancy for our squadron commander position, and the other senior members who were very active had all done their turn. So I figured it was my turn to step up. And so about 2 years ago now, I stepped up and became the squadron commander for CAP. And since most of my activities, not all, but most of my major activities with the Air Force Association are over with, except for my local chapter, I now have the time to devote to Civil Air Patrol and hopefully trying to inspire some kids to get into aviation and to continue our real mission of search and rescue and emergency services for the nation.
That is wonderful. As you know, well, my husband is the commander for our local squadron here in Lynchburg.
Absolutely.
And I serve as the chaplain for the squadron as well as the group. And as a matter of fact, that's where I met you. The first time I met you, I came to Roanoke to do CDI, character development, and I was impressed and I don't want to say overwhelmed, because I know what it takes. I know what it means as a military member to have attained the level that you have, and what an amazing resource and education and support and everything. You have everything that the cadets, they can pick your brain every day, all day, and never run out of things to gain from you. So that's wonderful. You've taken all your discipline, all your training, all your education, and here you are. You're right all the way where you're developing young minds again, and that's amazing. So I thank you. I thank you for your service in the military, and I thank you for your ongoing service. It's just never ending, and that's a wonderful gift and a blessing. So, thank you very much. I want to ask you, if you had an opportunity to speak, which you do, because this is going to be broadcast, to speak with active duty members who are currently serving across the services, and to give them some advice, what would you say to them?
Well, I would first thank them for their service, because they've made the commitment to serve the military, serve our nation, and defend our values and our interests, both home and abroad. Most folks, they choose to either stay in the military for a little bit of time or a long period of time, but all of them come out of the military with a certain camaraderie, sense of patriotism, a sense of contributing to a cause that's larger than yourself. And whether you're in the military or you've transitioned to civilian life, that same commitment can hold true. Yeah. And so I would caution them against going for material wealth just as a means to an end, but to continue to serve in some capacity. And more importantly, if you have the option, and not everybody does, do something you love to do, and commit yourself to it, because if you really love what you do every day, then it's really not work. It's,
right.
It's enjoying life.
That's wise instructions, I would say.
Not everybody has the opportunity to do that. You don't always get your choices economically, financially, educationally, but when you have that choice, you ought to move in that direction, in my view.
Yeah, take advantage of it. Now, that a lot of veterans, not all of them are where you are or where we are. There are the varying amount of ways that veterans end up. Some have had injuries, some have had struggles, emotional struggles, PTSD, financial struggles, and some of them are struggling all the way around. How would you encourage that person today?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the experience of today's veteran is very different from
Mm-hmm.
my experience overall, because most of today's veterans, and particularly those who've been overseas in the combat zones, they've seen and done things that I haven't had to do, and some of them have been very traumatic. Um, I would I would ask them to remember that you don't go through life by yourself. You do it with partnerships, either with a spouse that you love, a family, or a team of some sort. And if you don't have that team, then you should reach out and try to develop that team for a veteran. It could be any of the many veterans associations that are out there that can provide support for that. But be proud of what they've done. I mean, they've served their country honorably, and they should be very proud of that, and don't shirk from that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and hopefully, they will find that they're rewarded by thinking that way.
Right. For a lot of folks, faith is an important factor that grounds them and sustains them. What would be a good way for someone to pray for veterans today? What would you say?
Well, I would say pray for peace, pray for happiness, and safety in these tough times,
Yes,
because that's the name of the game today, is to stay safe.
right, right. Well, sir, I am so grateful that you were able to be with us today, and I will definitely be praying for peace and safety and courage and strength, all those things that all the veterans need today. And all the best to you in Roanoke at your squadron there. And if there's anything at all as a chaplain that I can do, please do not hesitate to reach out, and I'll be happy to provide support. And again, thank you for your service and thank you for being with us today.
Well, it's a privilege to have had the opportunity to talk to you, and I thank you for having supported me in the past. So I'll ask again if I need it.
Oh, absolutely. Check us
It's been
out. I'm sorry, go ahead.
it's just been a real pleasure, and thanks for
Yeah.
the opportunity. I usually on many Veterans Days, I have an opportunity to go out and talk to communities or schools or something. That's not the case today, or this
Right.
year. So I'm glad to have had this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Yes. So it'll be airing on Veterans Day. A wordwiththelord.com is the website. It's in my signature block down there. It'll be on YouTube as well, and Facebook. And so you can, if you have cadets that you'd like to go and take a listen to you, you can always direct them there as well. Again, thank you so much.
You bet. Good night.
God bless you. Okay, good night. Bye bye.